and welcome to the presidential inauguration. Welcome to you live from our studios here in Abuja. It is a significant day in the history of the country. The president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has been sworn in. He is the new occupant at the villa. So he's gone ahead and read his speech in terms of what to announce, and there's been a lot of reactions already to that one. Welcome. I'm Chamberlain. What's up?
Yes, indeed. What a day in Nigeria's political history. Things are now changing. We now know that the occupant of the first, home, if there's a first family, that's perhaps a first home in the country. Now we have a new #1 citizen, the new Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, now President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. A lot of people need to now get used to it in time on how to call the new president. I mean, if you've been used to calling President Muhammadu Buhari, now you need to get used to calling the new president, and the new man in the saddle, President Bola Tinubu. He got sworn in today. He took oath of office himself and Senator Kashim Shettima. What a momentous event it was today. Very interesting scenario, interesting speech, which got a lot of people talking. Some people will want to breach protocol. They got swerved away from the podium, and several other interesting perspectives on what happened today. The 5th president in the 4th Republic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm Seun Akimale.
Well, it was a speech that before he gave that speech, we did ask some of his party members what they were looking forward to, and they gave their perspective, saying they expected a robust speech that was going to demonstrate his willingness to spread his wings, open his arms, and let everyone come in. And this speech did come. He spoke about agriculture, the economy, security, electricity, and goodness me, the one that seems to get a lot of people talking much more than a lot of other people is the fuel subsidy. What a thorny issue it's been in the history of this country, and now he's said the fuel subsidy is no more. And by the way, this pronouncement may not necessarily be any different from what we had previously, because the PIA also did indicate that, except that the government did say, well, we suspended that part for a moment, and so the law already states that, but he giving it that oomph, saying, well, that tone of finality, saying, well, look, this is gone. Already the streets are reacting to that. We're seeing lots of queues, people deciding for themselves how they intend to respond to that. And so I don't know where you are, wherever you are, how the feel, how the situation is where you are, but we expect to see further reactions. But the thing about this is, we don't have cabinet members yet. So how and who
is going to answer
all the breakdown?
Who should we be asking the question? The few cues, either they are temporary or they are artificial.
Oh,
Chamberlain, I guess you don't have as much fuel in your tank, in your vehicle, but then that's a very big one. That's one thing Nigerians will feel. Maybe it's just a panic, but then we're hoping that this is just a momentary, and tomorrow morning we'll wake up and Nigerians will get back to work, because it was a bank holiday, it was a public holiday today, and people will get back to their normal lives tomorrow, knowing that the portrait that is hanging in their public offices have changed, a new face there. Bola Tinubu is the new president. He said there's going to be a merger, there's going to be a unified exchange rate.
Yeah.
He said there will be a thorough house cleaning of the fiscal and the monetary policy, the regime, and that the things are going to change. Inflation is going to, the market is going to react to it, and I'm hoping that maybe we'll see a dramatic change and the reaction in the stock exchange tomorrow, for example, when it closes, and perhaps we'll see some reaction also from investors. He did mention, made reference to them, and said, look, investors, I want to attract you. He talked about how he wants to unite Nigerians. Look, he said, if you did not vote for me, if you voted for me, you are all Nigerians. I'm throwing my arms open to everyone. And those who will criticize the speech, yes, they will. But again, you look at what is fundamental to the existence of our country, and I think for some reasons it touched on some areas, isn't it?
Oh, yes, indeed. And it just appeared as though he went back to the 2015 speech of the former president, you can call him former now, where he did talk about those who voted for him, how he was going to respond to certain things. But this president has said, listen, I'm going to be a president for all. If you didn't vote for me, no problems. It's a democracy, so everybody cannot all vote for me. So he recognizes and understands that. And then for the investors, remember, there was a thorny issue, how some of them, they say, particularly for the airlines, they couldn't repatriate their profit, their funds. So he says this time around, no, we will address that. Even for taxes, he also spoke about multiple taxation. He's been an advocate of ensuring that we eradicate multiple taxation. Now he reemphasizes and underscores that, saying that will be an issue in this government. And so there are different areas. And then he talks about power. Power will be available for homes and businesses alike. They will encourage states to also go further because the National Assembly has passed that law now. So he wants them all to get on board and ensure things happen. So it promises to be interesting, I tell you.
Actually, I mean, a lot to touch on. And that, I guess, analysts will now start pouncing on the speech and looking at those areas, either the gray or the brighter areas of the speech, and try to dissect and make sense of it all. But one thing that comes out to me, he's been heavily criticized in the past by his opponents and critics that to the extent of how much he believes in the issue of restructuring. He says our constitution is, let me quote what he said, our constitution and laws give us a nation on paper. We must work harder at bringing these noble documents to life by strengthening the bonds of economic collaboration, social cohesion, and cultural understanding. Let us develop a shared sense of fairness and equity. He says the South must not only seek good for itself, but must understand that its interests are served when good comes to the North. And it just brings to mind the granite pyramid of the North and the cotton and the cocoa in the South, and how much we can revive regional economy, create competition in the economy, revive and stir up that economy. Let there be foreign direct investment. Am I dreaming, Chamberlain? Or it's just the spirit of Nigeria that is just being working in me and trying to think that maybe for a moment we can have a better Nigeria?
That is what I think everyone wants, a Nigeria that works. I don't know who doesn't want a Nigeria that works. So all of this fight, these contestations that happens everywhere, I like to believe that people, it is because they want the country to work. People think, no, I can fix it. No, they think this person can fix it, but we all seem to agree that we want a country that works.
Absolutely.
So we'll go ahead and bring our guest in now. Let them weigh in on the matter. Segun Ajayi-Kabera is the Director General, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. He joins us from our studios in Lagos. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on the program today, Mr. Kajere.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we also do have Taiwo Yedele, who is a fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leadership at PwC. He joins us virtually from Lekki in Lagos as well. And then Charles Yore is a principal partner, Dion and Associates Limited. He joins us virtually as well from Kent. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us on the program today.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Okay, let me start with you, Mr. Ajayi-Kabera, Director General for Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. We know that MAN, time and again, have raised concerns about some of the key areas they want government to address. Well, I do remember vividly during, after kicked-off, MAN raised concerns concerning this point of origin, concerning how we wanted to ensure that we don't get the short end of the stick when after kicks in. But now, with this speech of the president, he did directly speak on some policies and some things he intends to do with the economy. What are your thoughts when you look at the economic perspectives, the parts where he made direct reference to what he intends to do with the economy in his speech?
Yes, thank you again for having me. I think I'd like to congratulate Mr. President. It's actually a thing of joy to see that at inauguration, the president speaks directly to some key issues. Like you rightly mentioned, we had expressed serious concerns about some policies that have negatively affected manufacturing business. And I'm glad that he spoke directly to some of them. Chief among which is the fact that we needed to address multiplicity of taxes and levies which have negatively affected manufacturing. He also spoke about a unified exchange rate, which we have always called for. He indicated that he wanted to promote domestic manufacturing as against the importation that takes away local jobs and gives it to foreign jobs. He also spoke about the issue of a fiscal policy that supports productivity. I think it is along those lines that one feels that the speech he made is encouraging and the resolve, because to say again, I carefully watched the body language and it indicated resolve. So one is looking forward to him hitting the ground running. He understands the issues, and in particular the reference to fiscal policy. I was even expecting that he would be more definite, and I think those ones will come in the days after. We are looking forward to the latest unwarranted escalation of the excise duty on alcoholic beverages and tobacco, which ran against the roadmap that government itself set about 3 years ago. It was a 3-year roadmap. But 1 year down the line, the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning did go outside of that and is promising to ruin those sectors that are affected and even make the anticipated revenue of government not realistic. So I think he's hitting the ground running. We are looking forward to putting quick action. I think most of the issues he mentioned can be accomplished in the first 100 days. For instance, reversing some of these policies that we have complained about.
Well, Mr. Oyedele, you are the tax person. You operate in that realm a lot more than some others, I reckon. So, and I also remember several fora where, before he became president, where he spoke about tax. He was at the time when the government had increased tax, so he raised concerns saying, look, he doesn't support them increasing tax because adding another layer will be a heavy burden for the people to bear. So he'd rather see them expand the tax net, which he also spoke about taxes here, eradicating multiple taxation. So what goes through your mind? How do you think do you see them also achieving this, as Mr. Ajoyekede said, within the 100 days, addressing some of these key tax concerns that the country has?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shimbalin. I'd like to also congratulate the new president, and also congratulations to Nigerians, because there are people who were expecting that Nigeria will go up in flames and there will be no Nigeria after 29th of May. But luckily, we've made it through, and I think we can only look forward to better days ahead. Now, regarding your question, yes, indeed. Many people know the president, our new president, to be a revenue person. But I also like the fact that even before he's swearing in as the president, he had been consistent. Consistent in the sense that we need to raise revenue. Granted, nobody is debating that. I think it's clear like day and night. But then, to raise revenue does not mean you have to keep introducing new taxes every time, which was what the past administration of President Buhari did for most of the time. They introduced so many new taxes, yet they were not collecting the revenue they wanted. So what we have seen from empirical evidence around the world is that the fewer the number of taxes, if they are broad-based and you use technology to collect them, the higher your chances of raising revenue. And this was actually even codified in the National Tax Policy of 2017 to say we should have fewer taxes, broad-based, and easy to collect. The past administration did the exact opposite for most of the times, and that's why it's not surprising we couldn't raise revenue that we wanted. So I think now that the new president has laid this out very clearly in his inauguration speech, it sets the tone, in my view. And I'd like to agree with my brother, the DG of Man, that actually this is not just low-hanging fruit. I think it's fruit on the ground. They're just waiting for you to pick up. These issues can easily be achieved within the first 100 days because some of these multiplicity of taxes issues are administrative, like the fiscal policy measure that the Buhari administration introduced in the last days of their regime. Not only was it contrary to the roadmap that they had themselves approved in 2022, they also did not follow due process in introducing those changes, not in line with the national tax policy. In fact, the tax on single-use plastic did not even have any legal basis. It was so curious why they will have to do that at the last minute and not giving sufficient time for implementation again. So if you put all of it together, I do think that the new president has started well by saying the right things. But like they say, the devil is always in the details. We now need to move ahead very quickly, but very deliberately with implementation in the best possible way.
Maybe we should bring in Mr. Charles Yare. I understand you're a lawyer, and give us a sense of how dramatic this policy statement that the president made today in respect of the economic issues, which I guess in his making sense of the situation and trying to change things. For example, he says that there will be an omnibus jobs and prosperity bill. It says this bill will give our administration the policy space to embark on labor-intensive infrastructural improvement, encourage light industry, and provide improved social services for the poor, elderly, and vulnerable. There seems to be some recognition that if you have to do these things, you have to tinker with the law, isn't it?
Thank you, Kimberly. I also add my voice to say I congratulate the new president and his boldness is making the statement straight away in his first speech. Well, the key issue basically is that we have been trying to see if we could I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer in private equity. Did you get that right? Not a lawyer, I'm an engineer in private equity, so correct that properly. And what we need to know basically is that the idea of using civil works and construction to turn the economy around has been on the table since Shagari in 1979, Jordan, Newton, and all of those places. And I think to a large extent, 8 years ago, they tried to also do some construction work as a means of turning the economy around through civil works. But the fact is that the failures you've seen in construction in Lagos, the absence of the skilled force that will support the professionals who design and drive the process is a key issue, because we don't have a system for qualifying our builders and tile layers and plasterers. We don't have an NDQ qualification arrangement. We don't have laws to determine what the local government can't build and cannot build, and short standards are not met. So for you to have those strong civil works operation, you need to deal with those basic issues that means that the delivery of service along those lines are weak. But by and large, my biggest impression was the fact that unlike most other African leaders, and I think to some extent in Nigeria, he's not looking at the problem from the point of view of effects, corruption and all of that. So he's looking at it from the point of view of causality. What are those little things that are radical that you can do that can take off those very many effects? Because once you're driven by effects, it destroys the logic of the process itself. For the key things he said, for example, he says he wants to reduce the arbitrage that takes place, the currency, swap of currency, run around, and all of those things, which destroys the industry. He wants to make sure that the management, the custodial function of the currency will ensure there's less wastage in the way we spend our foreign exchange. He wants to make sure that the industrial hubs based on agriculture as the first level before value is added will be brought into play. But I do not think that already makes it an exchange. It's still at the level of, what do you call them again? It's still at the level of bilateral transactions, which form the basis on which you can write the contract for the exchange. So by and large, I think he set out to not be frightened by the effects, but to look radically at the causes of those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Apologies for that. I think there was a mix-up in your designation on your. But let me go back to Mr. Segun Ajayi Kabir. One thing that will not only for those who are operating any business in Nigeria, but also in the households. I mean, burning fuel to run generators just to watch the news or watch a movie, or to in fact run your fan or your AC just to have some simple rest after a hard day's work is something that is giving a lot of Nigerians concern. But this is what the president has said. He said electricity will become more accessible and affordable to businesses and homes alike. Power generation should nearly double and transmission and distribution networks improve. We encourage states to develop local sources as well. Chamberlain mentioned the bill that the president, former President Buhari signed. Well, I'm looking at the manner in which President Tinubu has couched this statement in his speech. It does look to me that there seems to be some magic wand in that respect. It will gladden the heart of industrialists and entrepreneurs if electricity and all of the scenario around how to power Nigeria it gets better. But how dramatic can things be, considering the fact that almost 40 years and Nigeria cannot produce a stable power supply, but President Tinubu is coming and giving hopes about power generation. What do you make of that?
Well, I think concerning power, it's one of the very good points that he made in his speech. And for a manufacturer, the cost of energy is somewhere between 35 to 42%, depending on how power intensive your operations is. And you will imagine a president first day in assuming office is promising that he's going to lift that burden off you. I think most manufacturers will be excited today. But there are quick things that could be done. And I think this has been mentioned. There is actually a government policy that requires that if you are using more than 2 megawatts of electricity, you'll be qualified to go under the eligible customer scheme. Now, this has not been allowed to work because of the bureaucratic bottlenecks that have been put in the ways of qualified manufacturers who will have been able to take power directly from the TCN and will not have to go to the rather epileptic supply that we have always had from the discos. And again, you are hearing from the president. He needs to start to do things differently. Happily, we now have a situation where the power is on the concurrent list, and state governments can participate in generating power. I believe that what the president is going to do, and which is where putting action to all these words are, is ensuring that they actually encourage, and I think I heard him saying it, that they are going to encourage the subnationals to engage in the generation and distribution of power. I think the requirement that you put it on the national grid before you can distribute was a constraint. So I'm thinking that what he will do is to put a lot of incentives, a lot of encouragement, and even empowering those that could bring in foreign capital into that space. I believe that the experience he had in Lagos when he was governor must have motivated him to be that optimistic that he was going to double the supply. In the manufacturing industry, it has become one of the major issues for our own competitiveness. And Chamberlain, you raised the issue of our being apprehensive when the FCFTA was coming on board. It was because of the study we did that showed that we are going to be net losers if we had gone into, if it had taken immediate effect. And power was a very major aspect of it. So we have to be following up and also ensure that on our own part, we give all the necessary support that the president needs to make true what he has said.
Let me take this to Mr. Oyedele and probably following up on what you've just said as well, Mr. Ajayi. You know, power will not be available tomorrow. May 30th. But
you never can tell. There could be a magic for Chamberlain.
But
don't be an unbeliever.
No, I mean literally, not figuratively. But the markets will react tomorrow. Already, some persons are already telling us that the marketers are holding petroleum products. So there's a lot of queue. You know how the panic button can be pressed or set by different people here. And as we speak, before we came to you lot, myself and Sheon talked about it. Who is the go-to person in the governments to break down some of these policies or talk to the marketers concerning how they should conduct themselves or what to expect concerning fuel subsidy? Now, from your perspective, when you go to the streets tomorrow, you may see fuel queues because people are reacting the way they think it's necessary for them. How do you think the market will react tomorrow, particularly concerning this fuel subsidy matter?
Yes, you're right. The markets, in fact, I think that the market started responding a couple of days ago because in Lagos, we started seeing the queues like 2 days ago, actually. And I think it's because this President Tinubu, was very clear and consistent throughout his campaign. And he's clearly stated in his manifesto that he was going to remove, fuel subsidy. I think it was the first time that we find candidates, leading candidates for the presidential position, that bold. Before now, they were either in denial or saying that it does not exist or stuff like that. So I think that started the panic. I think that it's panic buying. Now, just coming out to say that during the inauguration speech, just confirmed the concern that many people would have had about, the price of petrol going up in particular. I think what needs to happen, you're right, there's no cabinet, so there's no minister to go to, but you have the NNPC and you have the regulatory authority, the downstream and midstream regulatory authority, and then you also even have the spokesperson. I believe that a few appointments have been announced already, and then I know that behind the scene, the president has an economic team. So they need to quickly provide context to that message, because I don't think that they're going to remove the subsidy tomorrow. I mean, literally tomorrow, right? It will take, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe end of the month in June. But you don't want to escalate the situation before you remove the subsidy. And I think the context that needs to be provided is that this should be done in a controlled, phased, and responsible manner, including, for example, ensuring that there is sufficient supply. Number two, ensuring that while we are removing the petrol subsidy, we will make the efficiency available, including the excess amount we are consuming on Forex to import the amount of petrol that we cannot even explain. It's very embarrassing that Nigeria does not know exactly the quantity of petrol that we consume. When the subsidy on diesel was removed, the consumption went down by 50%. So I imagine that the consumption on petrol would also go down by 50% or maybe even more. And you can make that FX available for the importation of diesel and kerosene. Kerosene is more than 1,000 naira per liter. Diesel is around 800, such that while you are having some marginal increases in the price of petrol, which in my view should not up to 100% compared to what we have now, you're going to have significant reduction in the price of diesel and kerosene. And in fact, the price of diesel goes directly, in most cases, to cost of production more than petrol, which goes to overhead, because that's what factories use mostly for their production. You may then end up with a situation whereby, rather than inflation being fueled by the subsidy removal, we can actually have moderation in inflation rate. And I also do agree with you, electricity will not be available tomorrow. But what you need to do is to set the right policy framework in place. Egypt had doubled their power generation over the past few years. There's no rocket science to what Egypt did that we cannot do. So if you address, we already have the legal framework to allow states to generate their own electricity. You also now need to address transmission, distribution, framework around pricing, How do you ensure that you regulate the, the providers and even, different sources of power, including renewable, including solar. Solar is renewable as well, including, hydro and the rest of it coming together, such that people can have that confidence to even invest in that sector to provide the electricity that we do indeed require to power the economy. Without energy that is accessible, that is affordable, and that is available, it's almost impossible for you to have meaningful and sustainable development.
Speaking about investment, let me take this to you, Mr. Yori. There's been this back and forth about investors wanting to repatriate their funds, and there was an issue, still is, probably not anymore, who knows what happens tomorrow. But if you rely on the statement or the speech by the president, he says, I will address that. As an investor, foreign investors, you will be able to do all of these things. So from your perspective, if you were an investor, for instance, I don't know, are you gleaning, do you get any impression whatsoever? This certainly sounds like music to the ears of foreign investors, you think?
Well, not quite yet, basically, but the fact that they decided to move in that direction is important. Chamberlain, I'll take you as an investor coming from Sweden. And when you bring in your money, you bring it in through what's called the official rates into the system. And very often, because fly by night, you need to go through a process before you can get your money out. Now, not only has the currency been depressed, when you want to take your money out, you're told you can't take it out at the rate at which you put it in. And then there are rules about saying, what did you register, what didn't you register? So that affects a major disincentive. And the reason why that is there is because we really don't understand the markets and the concept of money. Because the concept of money means that the impetus for your growth in the economy must be your own currency. But if you have a currency that doesn't have linkages, it means it cannot store value. And when you talk about the sovereign is not just the president. For example, if you have a local government chairman, he can't issue currency, but he can issue food stamps. If he has a warehouse, you can determine, because when you then begin to reduce the cost of survival within the hierarchy of needs, that means the actual demand on the currency is also doesn't affect itself. Another one that you must also look at, basically, is that when you talk about the concept of money, which is critical, which is what I think we still do not understand, is that there's a linkage between money as a store of value and taxation as a means of ensuring secularity in what's going on. Because society is already divided. You have those who are very old, who cannot work regularly. You have those who are able-bodied like you and I, who may not have the skills requisite to do the work they need to do. And then you have those who are young, who need to be trained to come into the working class. So if the money doesn't come back to the system, you cannot educate your children, you cannot upskill people, because in that skill bracket, the highest country maybe is Japan, about 85, but Africa is still about 30 or less than that. And then those who are much older represent what is called the buying population. If there's no purchase, if there's no production is as important as consumption for the purpose of an economy sustaining itself. So those are the key issues. Like in power, for example, if you have a proper market system, which means that the major power users can have both a producer price and a consumer price, those companies who already make beer and the rest of them, large plants, may actually make more money from the power they put into the system, and therefore regulate how much sharp practices you get from those who just become a transmission or distribution company. Those are the key issues. The market structures need to be right, and they need to work quite well. And I think I discussed this with him when he was governor of the state about Enron many years ago. Thank you.
Right. Let me quickly ask this to Mr. Segun Ajayi Kabir. You and your friends who are working day and night to produce one thing or the other, because one of the major problems that we face in this country is the fact that we cannot sufficiently produce what we consume. And that in itself is a step back if you want to generate revenue. And the kind of revenue that will get this economy working, it has to be massive. With over 200 million population needs a massive production to make it productive. So if there are 3, 4, 5 areas that you think this government can put their finger on to ensure that they work immediately, the Agile Kuta Steel Company is there. I mean, where was it that we were producing locally cocoa, and before you know it, Ivory Coast. And in fact, some of the cocoa taken out of this country was taken into some other country in Europe, and today they're producing cocoa for several other things. We have cocoa under the ground, we cannot produce chocolate. These are some of the start states of what is happening in our country. So if you are to mention 5 critical sectors or areas or industry that is partially owned by the federal government that we can use in jump-starting this economy, Bola Tinubu, as the new president in the saddle, will have to focus on what would these areas be?
Well, incidentally, he has even mentioned some of them. The first thing is power. I mean, if you are operating in an economy that has low cost, you will be able to gain the advantage when you export to countries like Nigeria. You will be able to gain the market even away from the domestic producers. So if we get the power equation right, I mean, we should be able to, to function more effectively. I will interpret your question to mean what will make us to be more competitive, because there's local manufacturing taking place. There are some sectors that were functioning before, but now they have been decapitated. We used to have a virile textile industry. We used to have a tire industry in Nigeria, but they have been killed by policy. And that takes me to the second issue. We need to look at our industrial policies, and Mr. President nailed it right on the head. The fiscal policies and the monetary policies have to be synchronized and not contradictory. We had situations in the past that the advantages you gain in the fiscal space is taken away in the monetary space. There was a time that we had a list of items that were not eligible for forex allocation, whereas those ones were areas where we don't have local substitutes. So I think we need to get the policy mix right. Another thing is the multiple taxes and levies that even Mr. President spoke about. You have the 3 tiers of government running a race of taxing out of existence the manufacturing sector. I mean, we have just mentioned the issue of excise, and you have regulatory agencies of government that, rather than promote and facilitate industrialization, they have turned basically to revenue collecting agencies, and they are so punitive in the way they do it, in such a way that your manufacturing process is grounded because you can be, your factory can be closed. So I think there has to be a Marshall Plan, for instance, for regulatory agencies to focus more on what they were established to do. Another area that we think we need to look at is the foreign exchange policy. I mean, there has to be an arrangement that prioritizes the allocation of the foreign currency that is available for productivity. There is no sector, to my understanding, that has the capacity to reflate the economy and even the capacity to generate the forex that we were looking for to more than the manufacturing sector, because all your processes are known, and when you export, you are able to repatriate your profit. So government needs to address the foreign exchange. And the fifth one that I would like to mention is also what Mr. President has spoken about. There has to be a coordination among agencies of government. They need to be able to act in unison, such that we'll be able to identify government direction. Planning, for instance, for a manufacturer has become very, very difficult, because from day one, you are not able to understand what is going to come. When we started this year, for instance, we didn't know that there was going to be an escalation in excise duty. So I think that government has to be consistent in its policy. It has to agree on a measure of engagement with the private sector, such that they are built into the planning process, and it's not a question of playing the headmaster, where everybody waits until you make up your mind, and whenever the policies come, you are not able to define how it's going to affect your business. So I think those are the areas where we think that the government could look into to bring about a more viral manufacturing sector. Because, like Chamberlain mentioned before, AFCFTA is a reality. And many African countries are retooling their processes so that they will be competitive. For us to be able to gain market access in those countries, we need to have a system that works. We need to have a manufacturing sector that is intentionally supported by government. And I believe that if Mr. President surrounds himself with people who have knowledge about how the manufacturing sector works and can leverage on the experiences that we've had across the continent, we should be able to play more significantly in the continental market, because it opens us to 1.4 billion people's market. We used to glory in having a very large population, 200 million people. But the African market is far more important than that, and it's ours for the taking if we do the right things.
Interesting. Let me bring Mr. Taiwo Oyedele here. So I'm concerned here because this government would need a lot of money. There's been a lot of borrowing, and the government, the outgone government, has talked about how they try to stay within the corridor of allowable for loans and borrowings. But the question is that to jumpstart the economy, you also need to spend. You need to produce. And there is one of the candidates who said he wants to take Nigeria from consumption to production. That looks a lot of, in a lot of ways, very sensible, because a country that is not producing anything cannot be able to receive anything. So the question is, where will be the biggest earner? Where will be the biggest revenue? If you look at in the United States, you'll be surprised that one of the biggest revenue generators in the United States economy is sometimes in the health sector. Sometimes in the management, in other sectors that is not very obvious. So what would you say that this government should look at? They need immediate money. What would be the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, good question, Sean. I think, you're right. The government would need money to run. I also even think that, one, I'm going to tell you a few areas where I think they can find the money. But I think even more broadly, government does not need a lot of money to fix our problems, because a lot of them are policy-driven. They were self-inflicted on us by ourselves, by our leaders. So we can as well just decide that we want to take away those problems, which I believe the new president has addressed as impediments to doing business. So number one, to make money, you need to stop the bleeding. So imagine that you can address the first subsidy successfully. Money start dropping from the following day, right? Because the 4, 5, 6 trillion that we wasted on petrol subsidy, we then go into federation account, and it'll be available almost immediately for the 3 levels of government to share and then spend. That is huge. The second one is, imagine also that you can tackle the oil thefts, so that we can move quickly to a quota of 1.6 million barrels per day. You will literally be printing dollars, because that's a lot, about 600,000 barrels per day. But I know this will not be immediate. Maybe this is more like medium term. But also think about, the MDAs. So not only like, Mr. Kadri said, not only are they collecting all manner of taxes, some of them are collecting the taxes and levies in dollars, MPA, NIMASA, right? And even inside the tax law itself, it says if you have any transaction in foreign currency, you must pay the tax also in foreign currency, which is really not very convincing, because why are you creating demand against your own currency rather than in favor of it? We saw that when Russia had their issue that invaded, Ukraine, and then the whole world descended on them with all manners of sanctions. They said, you know what, buy our crude oil in our local currency, pay taxes in our local currency, And in fact, their currency appreciated even before the sanctions were introduced. So Nigeria can also try and look at that, make money from the MDAs that are making a lot of money and not remitting. If you look at the Auditor General's report, for example, it shows that many of the MDAs are not only violating the tax provisions for their own affairs, they've collected VAT and withholding tax from their contractors and vendors, and they haven't remitted. These are government agencies, so the money is there, right? And then thirdly, I don't know whether it's thirdly or fourthly, the other area where you can make money from is just think about the amount of interest that the federal government has paid on ways and means. You know, they were paying at MPR plus 3%, which at some point crossed 20% overall if you add the 3% to MPR. And this amount was close to 2 trillion a year. Now, if you read the Central Bank Act, it says that the federal government shall be the only shareholder of Central Bank, 100%. And it says that the Central Bank, after covering its expenses, must distribute about 75% of its surplus to government as dividend. I have been looking for the past few years. I haven't seen where the CBN has distributed that surplus to the federal government. I do think that this government can quickly do a review. Just look at over the past 3 to 4 years, see the amount that is there with the CBN that you can use for this period, so you can address our immediate needs while you're trying to fix the policy issues, which are really the germane ones in terms of addressing our most pressing needs, both in terms of the economy, the business environment, as well as attracting both local and foreign investors.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an interesting conversation with all of you, but I'm afraid we have to anchor this segment at this point. And so we have to thank you, Mr. Taiwo Yedele, Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Tax Leader at PwC, Mr. Charles Iyore, who is an engineer himself, and then Segun Ajayi Kabere, Director General Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time and perspectives this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.